Welcome to the Humorism Evening Podcast, the official podcast of the Humorism newsletter. I'm your host, Seth Simons, author of the Humorism newsletter. It is currently early in the evening of Tuesday, June 30th. This podcast will be landing on your device sometime on Thursday, July 2nd. I apologize for missing last week's episode. I took a writing gig that involved a bunch of quick turnaround work, assignment in the morning, deadline in the afternoon or evening. Not really compatible to podcasting, but kept me busy, paying my rent next month. This month, I guess, the month is about to begin and will hopefully lead to more work down the line with that client. But we're back, and I think it's been a good week in the newsletter. We had that interview with John Reynolds that I thought it was really nice to chat with him. I enjoyed the movie, which I do recommend if you are a Hulu subscriber. And then tomorrow for me, but in the past for you, we've got an interview with Courtney Bush, the author of the wonderful new novel Learning, out from Joyland Editions. If you are a fan of Elif Batuman, if you like The Idiot and Either Or by Elif Batuman, I think you'll really like Learning. It's a really fun, breezy read from an indie press that's doing a lot of really good work and that deserves your support, deserves our support, yours and mine. And what are we going to talk about today? Today, we are going to talk about Louis C.K. He has a new special out this week on Netflix. I'll be talking a bit more about that specifically, the special specifically, on a different podcast next week. Not my podcast, someone else's podcast. Details to come. But today I want to talk sort of around the special. As I said in the last episode about Jeff Ross, if you're tired of hearing about Louis C.K., if you are content in your pre-existing, pre-formed opinions about Louis C.K., by all means, sit this one out. I don't blame you. Off with you. Go away. Do something else. Listen to some other podcast. But if you want to hear what I have to say, we'll get into it presently. The gist of what I want to talk about is sort of the media conversation around Louis C.K. I've talked about this before. I've written about it a bunch in the newsletter. And while his new special offers us a chance to do it again, Louis C.K. is a really lucky guy, you know. He every new thing that he does since the New York Times piece in 2017 about how he is a serial sex predator, every new thing he does since then gets to be a comeback. His 2018 set at the Governor's Comedy Club on Long Island, shitting on Parkland students and pronouns, that was a comeback. His first self-released special after he got canceled, that was a comeback. His Madison Square Garden show in 2023, you guessed it, a comeback. His novel Ingram, about an illiterate boy, that was a comeback. His Netflix is a Joke Festival a couple months ago, a comeback. And now his Netflix special, his first one on the platform since his fall from grace, that's his biggest comeback of them all because it is the mainstream accepting him back into its arms. It's almost as if the man never actually went away. He took a few months off. He took maybe 12 to 18 months off. And then when he came back, there was immediately an audience for him. And there has continued to be an audience for him ever since, an audience that doesn't believe or care that he is a confessed sex predator. And because he has this audience, the entertainment press, of which I am, for better or for worse, a part, has granted him the legitimacy that comes with a large paying audience in these modern times, which is the privilege to be treated as a serious artist rather than a confessed serial sex predator. What do I mean by that? I mean that it seems to me that if you believed Louis C.K. committed serial sexual abuse, I think your primary concerns would be, 1, if he's still committing serial sex abuse, 2, what mechanisms are in place to prevent him from committing serial sex abuse, and 3, why so many people, both in comedy and in comedy audiences, don't seem to care about these questions very much. I think the quality of his art would be very low on your list of concerns if you think he is the thing he confessed to being. I might even suggest that it wouldn't matter at all if a serial sex predator's art is good or bad, especially if he's confessed to it and refused to apologize in the decades since. These are big red flags to me, in my opinion, in my humble opinion, the fact that he confessed and he did not apologize. They seem to suggest to me that he is at risk of reoffending. They give me no assurance that he's not at risk of reoffending, especially when you factor in the huge paying audiences who forgive him for what he did, or who don't believe that he did it at all, even though he said he did it. And when you factor in all of the comedians eager to support him in spite of it. For instance, Bill Maher, who Louis C.K. reportedly thanked the other night at the Kennedy Center Awards ceremony. Louis reportedly thanked Bill Maher for sticking by him when his career took a downward turn. That's how Louis frames it. His career took a downward turn. He said something similar on Adam Carolla's podcast a few months ago, basically that the New York Times story put him out of the business, or put him out of business, either one. Business, career, business, career. To me, these are not the words of someone who takes responsibility for his actions. Nor are these the only red flags that he is at risk of reoffending. Other red flags, in my opinion, include his 2021 special Sorry, where he hilariously put the word sorry behind him in big letters, a word that he never actually said to the people he hurt. And then, of course, his 2020 special, Sincerely Louis C.K., in which he joked that even when women give you consent, you have to make sure they mean it, because sometimes they're like slaves singing in the fields who sound like they're having a great time, but actually they're not. Now, to refresh your memory, only one of the 5 sources in the New York Times expose described saying yes when Louis C.K. asked to masturbate in front of her when he was her boss on the Chris Rock show. The others did not. Dana Mint Goodman and Julia Wolof did not say yes. Rebecca Corey did not say yes. As for Abby Schachner, he didn't even ask Abby Schachner. He just started masturbating while they were on the phone together. So it is a bit misleading, all of these times Louis C.K. frames his offenses as him misreading the people he asked if he could masturbate in front of them. And we know for a fact that his behavior went beyond these women. The Times story describes him apologizing to Rebecca Corey for shoving her in a bathroom, to which she replied that he didn't shove her in a bathroom. He was thinking of someone else, as yet unidentified. After the story came out, Sarah Silverman said he used to masturbate in front of her with her consent, as did her sister. We have every reason to believe there are other people out there whom he did this to, which is why it matters that he never gave an apology or a full accounting of his actions, though he claims to be in a 12-step program for sex addicts. That's what he said on Theo Vaughn's podcast last year, that he has been in a 12-step program going through the 12 steps, one of which I believe involves making amends, if I'm not mistaken. It seems germane to me, too, that Louis C.K. surrounds himself with people who don't believe he did anything wrong, like Shane Gillis, who said the following on an episode of The Joe Rogan Experience in 2021.
All right, I'll tell you a cool story. He's going to be mad. I don't want to disrespect
Don't get the guy in more trouble.
No, it's just a funny thing. I got to the hotel, and he was like, what are you doing? I was like, I forgot my sunglasses. I'm going to go buy a pair of sunglasses. He was like, all right, I want you to come to my hotel room before you leave. And I was like, oh. And then, of course, he knew he was fucking with me. He was, when the doors were closing, he was like, I'm not going to jerk off. And then he went, I probably shouldn't have said that on here. That's all right. I love it. He's the king.
And Mark Normand and Joe List, his openers and friends, who had this exchange with one of their podcast producers earlier this year.
They DM me and they're like, Joe makes you get coffee. Doesn't that suck? Blah, blah. And I'm like, he's my friend. I'll get him a coffee.
Hey, what else you doing?
And you're an autonomous adult grown man. You could say, no thanks.
Agency.
I'd rather not. Thank you anyways.
Yes, like Louis' victims.
And you're not even doing anything. You press record for the fuck of love.
Yeah.
This is why it matters that the press stopped treating Louis C.K. as a serial sex predator and started treating him as an artist. There are questions to be answered about his actions. He is not answering them. It therefore follows, I submit, that someone else ought to. I grant, of course, that critics, comedy critics, TV critics, art critics, what have you, are not investigative journalists, and it is not their remit to get to the bottom of Louis C.K.'s abuses. That said, I do believe that it is their remit, our remit, my remit, to properly frame the subjects of our criticism and to offer ways of thinking about them that are both rigorous and ethical. What you're more likely to get these days, and also in previous days going back 6, 7, 8, 9 years, is critics projecting this responsibility onto Louis C.K. himself, wishing that he would deal more directly with his abuses in his art, or in other words, that he would do their work for them. For example, here is Hilton Alls in The New Yorker in 2020. As the show went on, I began to want to feed CK, telepathically, the different forms of storytelling he brought to his work when he was at the top of his game, and unafraid of losing out on being loved. What if he were to turn his shame into a story? What if he imagined how his dick looked to a woman he had horrified? Couldn't he go there, Richard Pryor style, and talk from the vantage point of his disgraced penis? Instead, he let his better stories trail off, fearing perhaps the existential ramifications of doing what he used to do, digging and dancing in the minefields of our collective unconscious. At one point, he told us that his mother had died recently. He was genuinely choked up, and then he zeroed in on his grief with an efficiency that was shocking, cold, and fascinating, and asked if we ever wondered how many dicks our mothers had had in their lives. Wouldn't it be amazing, he said, if your mom was like, I was with a black guy once, it was hot. Then he moved on to something else. But wouldn't it be hot if the new Louis C.K., jettisoning fear and self-consciousness, tapped into his old brain and became his mother, teetering toward that black consort in love with the American forbidden? And here is Imogen West Knights in Slate today, this week, about the news special. What is supposed to happen after someone gets, scare quotes, canceled? Especially in an instance like CK's, where he abused his power and committed acts of sexual harassment, but didn't necessarily do something that crosses the threshold of what we consider monstrously depraved. Like, I don't know, abuse children? If there is a line, and my God, good luck trying to definitively draw one, between what might one day be forgivable as errors of judgment or selfish thoughtlessness, and crimes against humanity that can never be forgiven, then CK, to me, falls on the former side of that line. Has anyone ever returned from cancellation in a way that appeases people who want justice for their actions? In a way that feels suitably contrite, reckons fully with what they did, and begins a new and deserved chapter in their career? Perhaps Aziz Ansari, who returned with an apologetic special on Netflix in 2019. Granted, the behavior he was accused of was much less extreme, with the allegation coming from only one person, but he has managed to claw back respectability in a smoother way than CK has. In a case like CK's, the road back to acceptance is perhaps impossible to fully pave. But there are things CK could have done to enact a better redemption and didn't. The problem isn't so much CK's being on television now, 9 years after his disgrace. He was always going to return. He is simply too profitable and too famous to be put out to pasture. The problem is what he has been doing in the interim, ... I wonder how people would feel about it if he had genuinely gone quiet, taken the long time he proposed in his initial statement about the accusations to step back and listen, end quote. In both of these examples, one from 2020, the other from just this week in 2026, the writer poses these little thought experiments at the end of their reviews. Wouldn't his work be better if it were more honest, they ask? Wouldn't it be easier for us to accept his comeback if he actually redeemed himself? Yes, the answer is yes, it surely would be. And allow me to pose a little thought experiment of my own. Louis C.K. is a dishonest comedian, and he has not redeemed himself. What, then, do we do with him? I think, I propose, I ponder, I suggest we might start by not treating his comedy as we would any other comedians, because he's not any other comedian. He is an incredibly popular and powerful sex predator who makes millions of dollars touring the world, counts almost every major A-list comic as a friend or ally, and has done nothing to suggest that he is no longer a threat to the women around him. If we put these facts front and center, I think we begin to see him not as a serious artist, but more as something very, very scary. And I think it is the job of the critic, at the very least, to convey this. Let's just zoom out a bit and talk about why this matters in the first place. The goal of Me Too in comedy, to the extent that Me Too was a cohesive effort with a cohesive goal, was to make comedy safer for women. I think that is safe to say. I think it is also safe to say that a secondary or subsidiary goal was to expand the scope of what is considered abusive behavior, and maybe another was to educate people about how common that sort of behavior really is. Obviously, Me Too did not accomplish these goals. I don't think it possibly could have, for various reasons we don't really have the time and space to get into here. Regardless, comedy did not get safer. Some abusers were identified, they were briefly taken off the board, and then they came back, all the more empowered and in some cases even vengeful for the experience. Nothing changed at a structural level. There were no reforms implemented. Louis C.K. said he would take a long time to listen. Jeff Ross said that, while he maintained his own innocence, quote, "The dangerous environment currently being exposed at the comedy clubs is real. I wholeheartedly support change and vow to do more to make my community safer for everyone," end quote. That didn't happen. The community did not get safer. In fact, it got unsafer. Louis and Jeff Ross are back. Crystalia is back. Brian Callen, TJ Miller, all sorts of people we would never even hear about because they're not famous are still roaming free. Me Too, at the very least, offered a mechanism for recourse, even if that recourse was only a little bit of community support and maybe a bit of space. That mechanism, it doesn't exist anymore. A while back, I talked to a New York comic for this book project I'm developing, and I asked her if there's any one thing she would want people to take away from her experiences, and she said yes, that comedy is actively unsafe for women. There are all these predators out there right now. There are no means to hold them accountable, and there are a bunch of very famous, beloved comedians sending them the message that even if you do get caught, people will forgive you. You will be able to come back. It won't matter very much. Something that happens a lot in my life, not a lot, fairly often, is that someone asks me, Seth, are there any comedians you do like? You know, you shit on all these comedians, you shit on all these crazy comedians, these Nazi comedians, you're always complaining about these Nazis. Who are the people that you actually like? And it frustrates me to hear this. First of all, because yes, there are lots that I like. I think I do talk about them. And second, because I feel like you might as well be saying, hey, you're always criticizing the US government, but who are the politicians you think are doing a good job? Don't you think you should talk about the policies that you do like more often? Comedy exists whether I like it or not. But since I do like it, since I happen to like it, I care that it's in incredibly bad shape. I care that so many of the top-selling artists are racists and transphobes and sex predators and explicit white nationalists. A year ago, they all went to Riyadh to dance for the king. A bunch of them just went to the fascist president's Bloodsport birthday party. Loads of them helped him get elected and are still friendly with him or his vice president or his insane health minister. At least two of them did free publicity for the violent sex trafficker Andrew Tate. I think that this is an incredibly corrupt and diseased industry, and nearly all the ostensibly good artists are either friends with the bad ones, silent about them, or powerless to do anything, because the clubs and the theaters and the talent agencies and media companies are run by depraved capitalists, and the racists and sex predators all have maniac fan bases who will fuck you up for saying anything anyways. Or they have friends with maniac fan bases who will also fuck you up for saying anything anyways. So yes, I like Rory Scovel. Hopefully that gives me some extra credibility when I talk about the people I don't like. But I think we've all got bigger fish to fry anyways. Okay. I think that's actually all I have to say about Louis C.K. today. As I said, I will be discussing the special on another podcast next week, so stay tuned for that. There's one other thing I'd like to do before I go, and it has nothing to do with comedy at all. I learned this week that one of my favorite poets, the great Stephen Dobbins, died earlier this month. He died on June 14th. He was a poet and a critic and a novelist who was one of the first writers I loved, both for his poetry and for his writing about poetry, especially in his two books on craft. I would like to leave you with one of my favorite poems of his. I'll put a link to it in the description. It's called How to Like It, and it goes like this. These are the first days of fall. The wind at evening smells of roads still to be traveled, while the sound of leaves blowing across the lawns is like an unsettled feeling in the blood, the desire to get in a car and just keep driving. A man and a dog descend their front steps. The dog says, "Let's go downtown and get crazy drunk. Let's tip over all the trash cans we can find." This is how dogs deal with the prospect of change. But in his sense of the season, the man is struck by the oppressiveness of his past, how his memories, which were shifting and fluid, have grown more solid until it seems he can see remembered faces caught up among the dark places in the trees. The dog says, "Let's pick up some girls and just rip off their clothes. Let's dig holes everywhere." Above his house, The man notices wisps of cloud crossing the face of the moon. Like in a movie, he says to himself. A movie about a person leaving on a journey. He looks down the street to the hills outside of town and finds the cut where the road heads north. He thinks of driving on that road in the dusty smell of the car heater, which hasn't been used since last winter. The dog says, "Let's go downtown to the diner and sniff people's legs. Let's stuff ourselves on burgers." In the man's mind, the road is empty and dark. Pine trees pressed down to the edge of the shoulder where the eyes of animals, fixed in his headlights, shine like small cautions against the night. Sometimes a passing truck makes his whole car shake. The dog says, "Let's go to sleep. Let's lie down by the fire and put our tails over our noses." But the man wants to drive all night, crossing one state line after another, and never stop until the sun creeps into his rearview mirror. Then he'll pull over and rest a while before starting again. And at dusk, he'll crest a hill, and there, filling a valley, will be the lights of a city entirely new to him. But the dog says, "Let's just go back inside. Let's not do anything tonight." So they walk back up the sidewalk to the front steps. How is it possible to want so many things and still want nothing? The man wants to sleep and wants to hit his head again and again against the wall. Why is it all so difficult? But the dog says, "Let's go make a sandwich. Let's make the tallest sandwich anyone's ever seen." And that's what they do. And that's where the man's wife finds him, staring into the refrigerator, as if into the place where the answers are kept. The ones telling you why you get up in the morning and how it is possible to sleep at night. Answers to what comes next and how to like it. That was by Stephen Dobbins. Rest in peace. All right, that's all for today. We will be back next week with more of the Humorism Evening Podcast. Thank you as always for listening and for reading, and, let me know what you think. My inbox is always open. Thank you, and end of podcast.